founder's wall that's going to be installed at the entrance of the church, and people who have given $5,000 and up will be our founder base, and they will be listed on that wall. So I just wanted to offer those ideas to you. But every donation that we ever receive here at the church is meaningful to us. We never underestimate anyone's largesse, and we're very, very grateful for any help that you can give us to keep this place going. So John Hatleberg was introduced to me by my husband as a possible speaker because Eric had run into him at least over a year ago. And when he described him, I kind of went, what? Because the description of him was so unique, so different from any other artisan that I know out here. And perhaps you prefer the word artist. In any event, artist. In any event, when Eric said that he was out here, of course, we both thought it would be wonderful to have him be a speaker. I would describe John as an artist, as a geologist, definitely as an inventor, as a bit of a showman, because he's used gems to decorate the human body, and also as someone who is continually expanding his work and his interests with a motivation that's as aesthetic as it is scientific, as it is inventive. And I think this is an extraordinary combination. So we're going to have a freewheeling conversation. He's going to show slides, and then we will welcome your questions afterwards. The first question I'd actually like to ask, because I didn't find any information on it online, is who were your teachers and where were you educated? You seem it, and it's fitting, just because he's sort of a magical being, to imagine you're just suddenly springing to life. But had you been inspired by someone, and some teachers in particular?
Well, I'd say in terms of teachers, I have incredible parents. They were full of love, and my path is certainly unusual, so I guess I wouldn't speak of the different academic teachers I had with my schooling. But when I was 10 years old, out of nowhere, although gems are not a family background, my dear parents realized that I'd become C's, but studied geology in public school in 4th grade. And so they found it was a basement rec center in Bethesda, Maryland, with a bunch of retirees cutting cabochons, these doming agates. And they put a little box there for me because I couldn't quite reach up high enough. And when that was over, they saw me again. 2 years later, Mama found a man. He was retired from the State Department. He was the last man out of Beijing, and lived a lot of his life in Madagascar after growing up near Tom, actually, in Maine. And between the end of me, am I still?
Hold it right in front of your mouth like that.
Hello?
Yeah. Perfect.
Now I've got everybody's attention. So between the end of elementary school until I left for college, I was studying with this man, Joseph Touchette, as another baseman, and he mostly taught me patience.
That's great. You had mentioned that your mother took you to the Smithsonian, and she was a photographer. And I remember the first time that I went to Washington, I actually beeline for the Smithsonian. This is like like a young adult, very young adult. And I really wanted to see the gems. I didn't even know why, but I'd heard that the Hope Diamond was there, and there was nothing I was more excited about, in all honesty, than seeing it, because I grew up in Cleveland and we didn't have stuff like that. And I was fascinated by it.
There's hardly anything like that.
Well, and then you'll tell us why. But I remember going and being really dazzled, and so the idea of your mother having been so attentive to you and your
hippie in high school. They were, somehow she went at the education department, was trying to find someone to give fasting demonstrations in the halls during the summer. And who knows where they came up with that curveball. But she got a chance for me to meet with actually my two heroes, Paul Deshotel, who was the curator for the Smithsonian Mineral Collection, and John White, the man who worked with him. And since I was 10 years old, I actually met Paul when I was 10 years old. This is fast forward about 6 years. And they were the two men who then vetted that I could indeed haunt the gem halls. And one of the things I love to do, I still do, is just stand by the Hope Diamond case and just watch women periodically start stroking their neck.
Now, when we sent out the PR about this, I was very excited to use the word counterfeiter because I think it's sexy. You know, I mean, you just think of heist movies, they're fun. And I assume that perhaps you'd prefer the word fabricator or, you know, certainly artist, but there's something amazing about counterfeiter. And I remember a long time ago, I saw the movie F is for Fake. I don't know if you know the name of that movie at all. It's by Orson Welles, and it's about a guy named Elmire Dory, D''Hory. And F is for Fake is an astonishing movie because Elmire Dory, actually, there's this brilliant scene where Wells is interviewing him in front of a grand fireplace some hidden address in Switzerland, probably. I can't remember exactly where. And Dory has a big newsprint sketch pad, and he's making, I'm sure it's finer paper than that, but he's making, with a charcoal, he's making Matisse drawings. And I mean, he's making Matisse drawings. It's not like he's making Hanukkah drawings or drawings that I as an artist would have, and I love Matisse, and I know his drawings really well. It's not like the kind of thing where you'd look at it and say, oh, I wouldn't know this isn't a Matisse. You would think it was a Matisse. And he was talking casually with Wells, and he was drawing them, and then he would rip it off this huge pad, crumble it up, and throw it into the fireplace. And you go, I mean, it was really shocking. And he was a real counterfeiter, forger. But how do you feel about forgeries? And once something is as good as the original, what is the difference to you? Because I'm still confused about this distinction, frankly.
So when people being formal with me, they sometimes call me a replicator. And you call counterfeiting sexy. And I've never heard anybody call a replicator as being sexy.
Much less.
So I like to describe myself as I'm a counterfeiter of the world's most famous diamonds for their owners and guardians. And the way that my counterfeiting skills have been tested have varied a lot over the years, but I've worked with, it's hard for me to even rattle all the names off, but we can get to that later. But for example, in terms of my counterfeiting, I just finished the summer of 2020, before the last year. The last is 6 replicas for the Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond was cut from the French Blue Diamond. The French Blue Diamond was cut from the Tavernier Diamond. And for an exhibition in the museum, actually a permanent exhibition, they want to put 3 of these, one of these sets of these 3 diamonds next to each other for them. Mostly so that, well, and we might talk about the Mona Lisa again later, but after the Mona Lisa, the Hope Diamond is the most visited object in the world. It's a 45.52 carat fancy deep blue diamond. It has an amazing history. Jeff Post, the current curator, says that a week doesn't go by without some little story or chapter being added to it because of its allure. And when I finished the first of the 2 Hope Diamond replicas for the museum, without letting me know, he did a test. It was like an electron spectroscopy. He took the the faceting diagram of the actual Hope diamond, and he overlaid it with how I was able to make my replica of it. And he said even at that level, it was hard to tell the difference. And I guess the other story I'll say about, from a different point of view, one of the diamonds I most love working on, because it was fantastic to work with De Beers, they had a 273 karat D flawless diamond, and a 5th generation diamond cutter named Gabi Tolkowski in Antwerp cut the crystal into this amazing jewel, which is, I think, objectively the most brilliant gem in history. And it took him 14 months, and it took me 14 months to counterfeit it.
And what is the name of that one?
It's called the Centenary Diamond, because it was for the 100th anniversary of De Beers. And they certainly don't like me telling this to people, so I'm glad we're recording it. But when I was completed, the Board of Trustees met, and 9 out of 12 of them guessed wrong, which was their $100 million diamond, and which was my replica.
It's so amazing. So perhaps the question is moot, like which would be, I guess, something about value, and value is something that we project and ascribe. So perhaps the whole issue of counterfeiting. If you have a gorgeous, amazing thing, then that's just what it is.
And with that, the only value of my replica is just the time that I put into it. I have some lab-grown gem material made to specifications, and it's essentially worthless. But when you can't tell the difference between that and something so valuable as these diamonds, it does give you a different kind of concept of what value is.
Well, we were talking a little earlier. At one point, you said that diamonds want to be octagonal. And I thought that was a fantastic quote. I didn't want to ask you about it then, but you had also mentioned that the idea of cutting a gemstone is a misnomer, that it's better to call it grinding, which I don't think anyone does. Everyone calls it cutting. But can you tell us a little about the actual fabrication?
Well, because diamonds are so valuable, many of the processes that were used to create a gem have been disguised for centuries. So one of the best examples, which I think was talked about back then, was in Amsterdam, when they had the cutting guilds. They didn't want people to know how they actually did it. And they didn't want people who had different aspects of the cutting process, the people at the very beginning, which is called brooding, to the brilliant. It's called what? It's called brooding. Like, Eric, you're a brute. Same as that.
We all call him that.
Excuse me. Sorry. And so they just came up with a misnomer saying that diamonds are cut, gems are cut, and it just doesn't happen at all. It's really like wood and sandpaper. You just have this, and maybe we'll get to the photograph of my cutting machine, but essentially, when you cut a gem, you have the gem held on a stick. It sticks in a head that allows you to change the angle that the gem hits the wheel at. So this would be 90 degrees for a way to cut a gem. This would be 45 degrees. This would be 0 degrees. That would be the large facet on the top of the table. And the other axes, so to speak, are the indices. So by changing those two, you can grind anywhere on the diamond.
So even when you have seen a diamond and made a mold of it, allowing you to replicate it, what you're doing is still like the most extraordinarily perfectionist work. Is there any machine that helps you do this, or does it absolutely have to be done with your own aesthetic eye and the measurements that you've taken?
Well, I do have that very head that can lock things at a certain angle and at a certain indice. But other than that, when I make a replica, it takes me anywhere from about 6 months to 14 months. And I think at some point you might also see some of the cutting diagrams that go along with it, because every time I make a mark on the gem, then I make a mark on this map that I make, the instructional drawing, so that when I go to the next grid size, essentially like wood, you might start, it's all cut with diamond, all ground with diamond. I start out at 100 grit, so it's like 100 particles of diamond per square inch, essentially.
So diamonds have to be cut by diamonds. This makes sense.
Yes. Oh yeah. Only way.
And you didn't answer the question of why do diamonds
I was
want
avoiding
to be octagonal? I think it's a great, when you, I think Tom Brokish, our wonderful facilities director, can talk to wood in this way, that wood has certain qualities that want to be treated, that make them want to be treated, as it were. It's obviously a little bit of a projection, but it makes sense to me that there would be a certain. Is it because of the depth? Is it because of the molecular structure?
April, you're right. It's the molecular structure. Every gem and mineral wants to be in one of 6 crystal systems, and not to go into it, but the most symmetrical of all creates the octagonal octahedral diamond shape, which is cubic. And so diamonds want to be perfect. So if they're allowed to grow in an environment underground where they're allowed to just grow as they please, they would grow into an octahedral.
Okay, and emeralds? Do they have a? What do emeralds like to be?
What do I like to be?
What if diamonds want to be octagonal? Would emeralds want to be hexagonal? Are there any other?
You're really ready for this. Yes, emeralds want to be hexagonal.
Really? Okay, now I just need lessons. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the famous diamonds with which you become so incredibly intimately familiar. I mentioned to you there's a book that a friend of mine recommended by a woman named Adrienne Munich, who was just about to publish it, called Empire of Diamonds. And it's about the giving of the Koh-I-Noor diamond to Queen Victoria in the mid-1800s. And when I read the blurb about this book, and then mentioned it to you, you actually corrected some of the things that were mentioned, and I wonder if you would please describe the event, that the placing of the court, its history, and the placing of it with the Empire, the British Empire involved. And by the way, Koh-I-Noor means mountain of light, and it seems like the names of diamonds are deliberately provocative. I mean, green Dresden just makes me see sparkles. So, but please go ahead and talk about your relationship to the Koh-I-Noor.
Just as a small intro to that, I'd say that my work with famous diamonds started because I really wanted to find a way, I think of them as paws, but I wanted to find a way to get my paws on them. As beautiful as they are to see, there's something that's even more beautifully and powerfully tactile. And people say to me, why didn't you become a diamond cutter? And I could have become a great diamond cutter, I suppose. Maybe not. But it wouldn't have allowed me to get that proximity to these gems that are so full of culture and history and value. And when you bring up the Koh-I-Noor, that's a perfect example, because although, in my mind, the most famous diamond in the world is the Hope Diamond, certainly for centuries it was the Mountain of Light, the Koh-I-Noor diamond. And although, again, I'm talking about the Mona Lisa again, but at one point, actually during the Kennedy administration, the Hope Diamond was diplomatically exchanged for the Mona Lisa. So for me as an artist involved with gems and painting, to have that be the scales of justice is incredible. But when you get to the Koh-I-Noor, it's a diamond that really has to be regarded in the realm of the fantastic. Like there weren't, you couldn't say it's worth as much as the Mona Lisa. Actually, what they tried to do is they took an inventory, I think it's about 1550, and they ascertained that the value of the Koh-I-Noor diamond was worth half of the known goods of the world.
Oh my God.
And another way they describe the value is that one ruler had the audacity to ask the owner of the Koh-I-Noor diamond. He said he wanted to buy it. And so he had one of his lesser wives reply, and she said, "Bring to me 5 men and 5 stones. Instruct the first man to take his stone, throw it to the north, second south, east, west. Finally, instruct the 5th man to take his stone, pierce the heavens as he may, fill the area thus circumscribed by those 5 stones, and it still not has attained the value of the Koh-I-Noor diamond."
Wow. Okay. This is just so fascinating. Do you have any like aesthetic theories of why as you're talking, I keep thinking about there's this great book by Gaston Bachelard called The Poetics of Space. He's a 1950s era French phenomenologist who wrote about poetry and how to understand poetry. And one of the things that he mentions is the way that people all project into works of art. And people project into diamonds similarly, I think. I mean, they are actually their own little, in a sense, spiritually inhabitable universes. So to somehow be able to occupy those places, to have a small world in the palm of your hand, or I don't know how big the Koh-I-Noor was originally, but do you think it has something to do with that, or?
Well, certainly one of the power of gems is that one of the reasons they're valued is because they're so finite. Gems are loved for their beauty, their preciousness, their rarity, their durability, their seductive qualities, but also that they're portable and that they're intimate. It's something that you can take and have it become part of your body. And so those very almost private reactions to a gem is how over the centuries we've internalized their power in a way that's primarily magical. I mean, the fact that people still believe in birthstones and the power that they might get from this particular jewel is really kind of surprising. So in terms of projecting oneself into a gem, which I do a lot when I'm fasting. The wheel is turning very slowly for the most part. It's not up to start with. The machine hums slightly. I'm there for months. Towards the end, I feel like I'm not really cutting that is grinding anymore at all. It's just like I'm just picking up the edges of the fast. It's like a fishing, like a skein, just like picking up and dropping somewhere else. I become that small on the gem. So you're looking into it, and its brilliance, its dispersion, its white light, its scintillation are hypnotic. And on the other side of that spectrum, gems are very unusual because they become larger than themselves, particularly with the aspect of dispersion, like the rainbow. So as you turn them in certain lights, you'll see that they can project out fire out into space. So the fact that you can go so deeply into something so small, but it's bigger than itself, is a very odd object.
It sort of helps with the Big Bang notion and trying to get that fitted into your head, it seems to me. Going back just for a second to the Koh-I-Noor, so
I never told you that story about Vicky and Al when he asked me.
I'd like to hear that story. That's what I was going to ask. And does she say, bring me the Koh-I-Noor and something will happen, or? Don't you love that he calls them Vicky and Al?
That's because I'm kind of mad at what they did. So here you have this Koh-I-Noor diamond. It's 186 carats, which is about this big. I have a photograph of the replica I made to show you. It had this profound value for centuries from different regions it was where it lived, from India, where it was found, to what was then called Persia, Afghanistan, what is now Pakistan. And when the British were colonizing India, and they succeeded in the war of taking over the Punjab, Kashmir, one of the 7 demands they made was that the Mountain of Light had to be placed in Queen Victoria's hand by Shah Singhjit, which he ultimately did. And then once they had this is what we were talking about earlier, is it was a moment of time, and sometimes gems have some small piece. I'm just going to hold this one differently. So sometimes gems have something to do with history. So this was 1849. The famous Crystal Palace exhibition was 1851. And it was a moment in time in that Great Britain was emerging with their immense wealth as the first industrialized nation in the world. And so along comes this fantastic treasure. And Prince Albert in particular looks at it, and he says, it's old-fashioned. Great Britain is jumping ahead of the rest of the world, and we want to show off this huge treasure that shows our power over India. So we want to have it recut.
Ow. So, and did he see it in its proper position? You had mentioned that it was improperly placed in its display.
Well, that did happen. The large thing that happened is when they were having it recut, it went from 186 carats to 102 carats. And the men from Amsterdam left the country before Prince Albert could review their work. And while they were working on it, at one point, the stone, it just stopped cutting. They couldn't grow, so they made the machines, okay, faster.
Yeah, but you mean that it couldn't be cut? It suddenly resisted?
It's like, well, the story is that it didn't want to be cut. And it became so hot, it glowed red from the heat. And it certainly could have exploded. But many people, because to me, gems are perfectly designed containers for meaning, in particular with our emotions. I think the power of a diamond and an engagement ring is profound because of what we can project of our meaning into the gem. And so when people talk about the Koh-I-Noor diamond turning red, it's easy to be convinced that it didn't want to be.
I was a little angry. Yeah. No, that's fascinating. And then you also said that it was improperly displayed, so that its facets couldn't actually be appreciated. The problem with the royal family, I mean, honestly.
So what happened is when the accounts of this extraordinary crystal palace opened, there were lines for people to see this gem that's so storied. And people got there, and it's like, well, this isn't so impressive. And part of it is because, actually, take this top off. This is kind of like the Koh-I-Noor done right here. And so it's domed. And only in the last 2 years, a wonderful man in England found the display case. And instead of the instead of the Koh-I-Noor diamond sitting on a display like this, rising above the surface, some genius had the idea, of flipping it upside down on its large flat facet. So it was buried in, I think it was black velvet. And of course, the lighting they had then.
Not so high.
No.
Yeah.
And also, it couldn't move.
So it was entirely misseen by everybody, basically. Well, it interests me too because again that goes to the whole question about faceting and diamonds wanting to be a certain form. Because if you have a broad top, then you can see into it clearly. It's like an open eye rather than something that you're peering at, or rather than looking through jagged lines. So. When you made your replica of the Koh-I-Noor, did you make the original? Did you try to make the uncut original 100
Did I tell you to ask this one?
No. I made it myself.
So I worked for De Beers in the 1990s, their centenary diamond. And at that point, there was a book by Ian Balfour, Lord Ian Balfour, and it was my Bible. It's called Famous Diamonds, and I read it many times. And the first time I went to go work with and the people at De Beers, Ian Balfour was there. I thought, oh my God, this guy completely has like this rake up his back. He was just so tight, and he looked like he wouldn't be interested at all. He turned out to be a great friend of mine. Actually, he came into the Smithsonian at one point. And in his book, he says that before the Koh-I-Noor diamonds were cut, that the trustees of the British Museum called for the benefit of future artists and scientists that a mold be created.
Yay.
And so...
Yay, go science.
It was completely out of the Raiders of the Lost Ark because I called up the Natural History Museum in London and said I wanted to look at their replica collection. And I've seen replica collections from around the world, and they're terrible. It's like 98% of them they're made out of glass, like diamonds. Often, if you have this big, the replica they make for it is like big because they want to impress people with it. But I went with one of the curators, his name is Dr. Peter Tandy, and we went to look at the so-called replicas, and I found this glass box that said, "Do not touch." So what do? So we lift it up, and there's this plaster egg in it about this size, and it knew immediately that it was authentic. There'd been a plaster mold made of the original, and the cast, when we turned it over, it said this is an exact replica of the original Koh-I-Noor, and it was signed, initialed by the keeper of the collection at the time.
It's amazing. So then you were able to, so you did replicate the original uncut?
So I was prepared. So I had all my machines and equipment waiting for me in the bathroom of my hotel room. And I went home that night. I mean, I was talking to someone at the Met about this because they had the Dresden Green diamond recently. And at the Met, it seems like they don't let anybody touch anything. And she said, they gave you the original cast of the Koh-I-Noor diamond, and the 2 pendant diamonds, and the 3 lead casts of the Regent diamond, which is now in Paris, and a glass model of the Dresden Green diamond. So, and they just signed over to me, and that night I went home and just made all of them.
Wow. And now, where are they now? All the replications?
Well, the ones that were owned by the Natural History Museum are back in the Natural History Museum, but for educational and scientific purposes, and hopefully another large diamond, I've given some of those sets to other museums around the world
That's
when I have permission.
yeah, that's so incredible. Wow. So the Koh-I-Noor is, I mean, it's getting bigger and bigger as you're talking about it. Its whole history. And how about would you talk a little bit more about the Hope Diamond and your relationship to that, which I guess even precedes your involvement with the Koh-I-Noor. Yes.
So I had my moment as an artist when I woke up. I guess I was about 22 years old, something like that, maybe 26. But John White, who had been one of my heroes, had invited me to come to the museum. And we went at the Smithsonian, they have what's called the Blue Room, which is the outer vault, and then there's the inner vault inside the Blue Room. And so he brought the Hope Diamond off display in its Cartier necklace, and he turned off all the lights. And then he put it under a shortwave light, and he just like juiced it up for about 30 seconds, and then turned the lights off. And the Hope Diamond, with its 350 years of European intrigue and allure, became this optical phenomenon. It looked like it was possessed because it went from this fancy deep blue diamond to like a glowing red possessed
What?
jewel.
From having been hit by shortwave light?
So what happens is the electrons got excited by the energy of the shortwave light. And when that light force is removed, it has to give up that energy somehow. So the electrons go to an outer shell. And once that's removed, they have to settle down again. And in this case, they settle down by giving off red light.
Oh my God. So, I mean, now this of course makes me think about what is dead and what is alive. And we all know, I'm sure you've all read recent conversations between scientists about, are viruses alive? Are they technically really alive? Are they technically really just these functional kinds of chemical behaviors? And
One of my, I'm cutting you off, I'm sorry.
no, you can come
But Jeff Post, who's the current curator of the Smithsonian, his daughter is working on, I never considered this, until I heard about it from him, but it's like, what's the nexus between the different kingdoms, the animal, mineral, vegetable? And she's studying these deep sea specimens. And at a certain point, you can't tell what's mineral and what's animal because they're, what's the word for it when they not exactly coexist, but
what, symbiosis?
yeah, it's maybe symbiotic. And then finally, just finish that comment about the Hope Diamond. When I saw this diamond become possessed, and it was the only light in the room, that was my moment as an artist, and it changed me, all my work since then, because I realized that these gems that we so often call on to play out our emotions in conventional ways also have the power, like an alter ego, to bring out those qualities in much more interesting and misunderstood ways.
So your beautiful quote that we publicized are, gems are primal, living, vital, and seductive. And I think with each story you're proving this more and more. But it's also, they're also fetishes, they're power symbols, they're perfection symbols. They have a certain, in a sense they collide with justice because they become so important. They turn basic human values on their heads, in a sense. That someone would say that a diamond is worth, whatever, like, nations, lives, years, whatever.
I specialize in making $1,000 engagement rings for people who have no money.
You do? Okay. But what I want to get into just a little bit now is, and having said that there is, I mean, everyone knows now about the blood diamond, horrible blood diamond trade in Africa, South Africa, and elsewhere in the world.
So here's a story about that. 2 stories. I was thinking about them today. So in terms of how gems sometimes are involved with history, what do you think is interesting about the fact that when Nelson Mandela was finally released from prison, he went out that day to go shake Harry Oppenheimer's hand, the head of De Beers?
I don't know what to think. What do you think was on his mind?
Well, I think he realized that that was the power structure, and the whole economy, certainly at that time, of Africa, the only engine it had was South Africa, because the discovery of diamonds, so that the whole poor continent, the one economic engine they had was the diamonds. And he realized that the future of his people was somehow going to be tied to that. And I was also thinking today about blood diamonds. I thought similarly, maybe you can ask me this when the video's not running.
Okay. What I wanted to bring up now is the fact that, you see that the title of this slideshow is Snails into Emeralds, but besides that, John, as an inventor, has invented a process by which he can turn roses, for instance, into diamonds. And I can say that to myself 100 times, and it's not going to make it any more able for my mind to get around it. Can you talk about this process? He's patented it. They're called Eros Rose diamonds. And I think that this is fascinating, and I also think that the kinds of injustices that have marked the diamond trade and practices can be entirely corrected by something like this, where you could turn roses or whatever into gems. And the photos that you showed of them are extraordinary. So how in the world do you start making diamonds out of roses?
Well, I think you have a great idea, April, that maybe you should start showing some of these slides, because they might be more interesting. The rose diamonds are at the very end, or almost very end. But very briefly, I'll just say, because I've had access to holding these incredible gems, that gave me the opportunity to try to see diamonds from a different light, a different perspective. And so I decided to design them from the inside rather than just fasten the outside. I wanted to work from the inside out. And so I came up with the idea of these Eros Rose diamonds. And to me, they're the most romantic diamonds in the world, because I take the buds, the petals, the full-blown roses, some thorns, and life on this planet is essentially based on carbon. We're carbon, flowers are carbon, roses are carbon. So many people know this now. They didn't know when I started out with my rose diamonds idea, but you just extract the carbon from the roses with heat initially. So first you have the rose, then you have charcoal, then you have graphite, and then you have highly refined graphite. And then it's very difficult to make. People hear about lab-grown diamonds a lot these days because of all the people, India, China, making them. But in order, I call all their diamonds pencil diamonds because it's just generic graphite. But to make a diamond, to find the sweet spot, to make a diamond out of organic carbon, Roses, for example, have many silicates in them, and they get the graphite refined enough so that, and my wife Risa has a rose diamond on tonight, maybe she'll show it to you. But essentially that's the process.
So the first slide is actually referencing the title. And I remember at one point I was talking to you on the phone and you said something about, well, snails turn into pearls pretty easily, but sometimes they turn into emeralds. And I thought, snails don't turn into pearls easily, what are you talking about? And then the emerald thing was, of course, like a million steps further beyond that. So describe this first slide, please.
So I'm really interested in gems that are once alive. And when you have particularly something that's a shell, this was a snail in Australia 6 million years ago. And when you have that, essentially like a carbonate shell, just literal beaches here, it makes it so that the transmogrification from that shell into this silicate of opal is not that difficult. Similarly, the colors are much nicer than this, but this is a piece of rhodochrosite that was a snail, also became a gem. It amazes me, as you can tell, magic is a big part of my perspective on gems. And imagine you can also tell that I'm just like possessed by these gems myself, and I can't believe they exist, that these wonders of the world. So this was a snail. This one turned into rhodochrosite. This went into opal. This is a snail that became a pearl. And what happened to this is that people think that pearls are formed because there's a little grain of sand or an irritant gets in. No. What often happens is that there's something like a snail that's trying to eat the mussel, eat the oyster. And so what the oyster does is, like, pearls are really like beautiful acts of self-defense. So the oyster is squirting its nacre, essentially mace, to try to stop the snail from eating it. And then what April was saying, you can imagine how you could have a shell that might become replaced by an opal, but to have a snail, and actually this has a beautiful snail structure to it, which you can certainly see there and there. But how a silicate in Colombia, where most emeralds come from, could ever form from a snail into an emerald, I don't understand, and I know that it's even harder. I've seen a snail that became a ruby.
Oh my God.
And I didn't buy it. It wasn't gemmy like this. But rubies are essentially formed in an igneous process. And how there's anything left of a snail with all the magma going on, I can't imagine.
You know, I actually wanted to ask, I'm going to advance the slide. Right there. Mom and Dad?
No.
They're not that cute.
Pretty cute.
So, people hear about the Hope Diamond, it's so valuable, this and that. Well, the Hope Diamond has its own after-hours life. So, before the museum opens, usually, or sometimes after the museum closes, things happen that aren't generally written about. Like, again, I mentioned the net, and
Is your mother wearing the Hope Diamond? And your dad?
no, that's Mary Winters.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mary Winters helped fill in a missing link of what happened with the Hope Diamond between when it was stolen in the French Revolution and when it appeared in London 20 years later. It's kind of amazing. I would love to do a book museum wouldn't like this, and I don't have enough photographs, but photographs of people wearing the Hope Diamond, like, how does that happen? And Mary, who I love, actually sat behind her daughter in high school. Why did Mary choose that dress?
Damn good question. She does look like she's conquered something.
She's a descendant of Audubon, who's in the news lately. And on the other side, Bert Ashley, he's a volunteer at the museum. He's the only one I knew who wore the Hope Diamond who knew how to pose. but like his photograph is complete, except, maybe where he has like this, pocket diary or something, and it's like a pencil there or something.
You're a pocket protector with the Hope Diamond is a mashup.
So, what about these things about how powerful these gems are? And I just said this in a piece we talked about. It's like, what's it like to hold the Hope Diamond? And people love to have their photographs taken when they're wearing it. I've actually held the Hope Diamond a lot because of making the replicas. But I think, so the Hope Diamond weighs 45.52 carats, and it's also almost like a National Bureau Standards inch. It's like 25.5 millimeters. And I think its first European owner, Louis XIV, the Sun King, and I imagine, because I've done this parlor trick, and perhaps he did too, but you just take the Hope Diamond, and it fits right in your palm, like right there. It's like, okay, diplomatic exchange for the Mona Lisa, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
It's just something fascinating about that, and it's amazing to have one famous diamond like the Dresden Green in one hand and the Hope Diamond in another hand, or to have the Hope Diamond in one hand and the Rossa Reeves, which is the most beautiful star ruby in the world, in the other hand. I guess I'd have to say it's what do you even call it? It's like in Seal with Pluto or something. It's like
Cosmic. It's cosmic.
I'm going to use that word.
So this is, which are these three?
So this is half of the 6-year project I finished last year for the Smithsonian. These are the 3 iterations of the Hope Diamond. On the far side is the Tavernier. Man named Tavernier, the original Marco Polo. He made 6 expeditions to India in the 1600s. And at the 6th voyage, he came back and he sold like 1,400 diamonds to Louis XIV. Most of them to a type of cummerbund. The largest and the most precious, even though it was blue, and so people at the time thought it was a female diamond, which isn't as valuable as a male diamond. Louis XIV bought it. So that was like 112, 115 carats. The middle one is called the French blue, or the French blue diamond of the crown. And it's one of the only conceptual gem cuts I've seen in my entire life. I've worked on this diamond a lot with the Natural History Museum in Paris, a man named Francois Farge, who knows more about the early history of the Hope Diamond than anybody. And so Louis XIV was the Sun King. His colors were blue and gold, like a Cub Scout. And this diamond was recut for him. And the reason it was conceptual is, well, first of all, the tavernier was obviously cut essentially like a crystal. They thought it was somewhat like a heart. But the crystal is very thin. And if you have a rough crystal and you want to cut it and make it brilliant, if it's too thin, what happens is, instead of the light going into the stone, reflecting and bouncing back out the front, it's called a fisheye stone. The light just goes, passes right through without any brilliance at all. So this was a thin crystal. And so however they came up with it, they decided that this 7 or 8 sun here, where the crystal was so shallow, it's a 7 or 8 sun, and those were cut below the critical angle, which means the light goes right through it. And Louis XIV, I think they had it on a staff, so to show his power, he would hold it up. And it was backed with gold, so this became a diamond. It was the blue sky with the sun behind it, and because it was dead in the center, it reflected, instead of that blue, reflected the gold sun.
And gave him his Boy Scout colors, so it was complete. And what about the one on the right? So,
the French blue was stolen in a week-long theft during the French Revolution. Amazing story. The first night, the primary gems, the French blue, the Regent, the Sancy, were all stolen. But I think the fourth night, there were prostitutes, and there were picnics, and even when people started being offered boxes of diamonds along the Seine, maybe something's up, nothing was done about it. It was only after a week when essentially the crown jewels backed the economy of the state of France. And by the end of the week, the French economy had nothing more to back it because it was all being taken over to London. So it was stolen. And Mary Winters, whose dress you like, she realized that between the date that this was stolen and the date it appeared without any provenance in London was 20 years and 2 or 3 days. And the statute of limitations was 20 years.
Wow.
So France could no longer claim where did this diamond come from, and it had no, where was the crystal? How was it cut? When? So the thief took this diamond, cut it into this one, waited an extra 3 days, put it on the London market. And one thing that's controversial is that this is the Hope diamond. Hope was the richest banker in the world. Thomas Jefferson, when he wanted to fix the Louisiana Purchase, so the United States could be bigger, the money was borrowed by Hope. But it's kind of a long story. There's a possibility that this diamond is named after the man who might have arranged its theft.
Oh my God, that's a great story. And this is, so that's one of your diagrams. Looks so simple. And then this is the grinding process, yes?
Finally, there's a shot of me working. So, on the side close to me, that's the very beginning of cutting the first of the blue diamonds, the tavernier. So you can see there's the wheel. Why it's at such a crazy angle, I don't know. You can see the large white crystal. The diamonds are obviously blue, so why is that white? And you can see the end of what I call the head, which fixes how the stone hits the lap in terms of the angle it hits it at and the indice it hits it at.
I'm gonna go forward because we're a little over time, although I just wish this would keep going forever. And please tell us about these.
So I guess the most interesting thing about this is the French blue diamond, and I guess it's kind of interesting here because you see all these like zeros and some minus signs and some plus signs. So I do this again and again, where the facet wants to be a little bigger, there's a plus. When the facet wants to be smaller, it's a minus. When it's just right, it's got the circle. And it's not so hard when you have a plus next to a minus, because you just make this facet a little bigger, it makes this facet smaller, so then it's right. But that doesn't happen all the time. So on the left is the finished Tavernier, and I said, why on the cutting lab is it white? So one of the first person to want a replica of the Hope Diamond was Napoleon III, and the one he got just looked terrible. And I'm lucky because technology has caught up with counterfeiting, and the cutting's very difficult. But what I've only been able to do for the last, say, 10 years is match the color. So everything I cut is white, but there's a process that I do with this amazing company in Minnesota called Exotic, and they have a coating process. It's a precious metal, physical vapor, precious metal nanodot physical vapor process, which essentially to match the color of the Hope Diamond, they're taking some precious metals. In this case, it's gold. If you take a piece of gold leaf next to a bright light and look through it, you don't see gold, you see blue. Nanodots, it's just tiny, tiny pieces of gold and other rare earth metals. And then with the physical vapor, it's just a cloud. So these gold nanodots are held in a cloud and then rain down on the back of the gem, and it can take years to get the color right.
But it's also entirely alchemical to my ears. I mean, I know what you're saying is all about chemistry, but it's...
So this is that egg-shaped Koh-I-Noor diamond replica. When, I think for 10 years, I'd go have meetings with Anthony Oppenheimer, and I'd say, Anthony, don't you want to see what it looked like? This original Koh-I-Noor diamond that was, again, from 186 carats to 102 or so. And when it was, I think it was 105th anniversary of the recutting of the Koh-I-Noor, and he said no. I figured it wasn't going to happen with him. But although he was lovely to me in other ways. So here you can see what took me 13 years to get permission to cut. And you can see there is, a lot of dispersion, a lot of yellows, some rainbows of blue, orange, whatever. So this is what we think of as space up for the Koh-I-Noor diamond. In the back of it is one facet. So if it had been something like this in the Crystal Palace exhibition, people would have been excited.
Mountain of light, absolutely.
This is the last diamond I worked with. The code name is Celeste, up in the top left-hand corner. Officially, it's called the Okabanga Blue Diamond. Like the Hope Diamond, this is a fancy deep blue diamond. It was 20.46 carats. it's the only time they've really found. Botswana is the second largest producer of diamonds in the world, but they're all white, many white diamonds. And I guess it's in 2018 they found this blue crystal. And, there was a wonderful team that I worked with from Botswana in South Africa. The crystal was brought to New York. They decided to cut it in New York in secret. It's really something to watch the birth of a gem from the crystal to the finished gem. And with all the different notations on there, because it took me months to cut one of these, early on, usually the diamantaires would say, okay, John, you got a few weeks, because they want the replicas mostly to protect the gem itself, but insurance, display, promotion, education, they'll be able to safely send the replica to the Middle East or China or Japan and not have to worry about what might happen if this is an actual diamond. So sometimes they're used as like the advanced force of a diamond that's available for sale. Right now, this is on display at the Natural History Museum in New York. We'll be there for about 6 months. It's certainly very powerful. I guess the main thing we said about this photograph is when the diamantaires said, I want this in a few weeks, and then 5 months later, I hand them a replica. When they see all these notations, they realize it's more complicated than they expected.
Oops, sorry.
That's the end of the show.
Right, what happened? I was just going, I wanted to show the air hostiles. Would you, you have to talk about this.
What about the one before?
This is the malachite painting that you're doing. So John's also doing paintings with malachite exclusively? No. Because I know there's a rose diamond in one of these.
So let's go back 2 more. There. So all of these diamonds here were made out of roses. And the yellow one, which is the same one that Risa is wearing, the same badge. I do think that these are the most romantic diamonds in the world. The history connecting love and romance to roses goes back to Aphrodite and Venus in Greece and Rome. And the connection between diamonds and love and romance goes back essentially to the end of the 1400s. And as briefly as I can say it, the origin of the word diamond is avenus, which means strength. And for centuries, only a king, say, or a sultan could wear a diamond because it has so much power. It can make them invisible in battle. It can make them invincible in battle. In the 1300s, and in the 1200s, there were sumptuary laws forbidding women to wear diamonds, even though there were no diamonds in Europe at that time. But the mystical stories about them circulated. In the sumptuary laws, eventually Mary could wear diamonds, and then queens could wear diamonds. And in 1400, a woman, she's the patron saint of jewelry, which I've never heard of. It seems obvious to me. Her name was Agnes Sorel. And she was a lesser nobility in France. And Louis VII was completely smitten with her. She was older than he was. And she convinced the men who were royalty to loan her their diamonds and jewelry. And she appeared in front of the king attired with all their jewels. And because there was a rise in the merchant class at that time, the other women in court said, if Agnes can be allowed to wear these, forget about the sumptuary laws, and we're all going to wear them. So between that time, 1440, the rise of the merchant class, it made it so that these diamonds that had always represented the strength of the king became known as representing the strength, fidelity, and devotion of the marriage.
Amazing. Oops.
I haven't shown any jewelry that I make, but competing with the roses here are a pair of rose diamond earrings.
Sorry. Go ahead. And this is your painting.
This is a 3-foot painting, all made out of gems and minerals. Flowers like the roses in the last shot. And this is a pearl corn cob, and I have one sitting in the box over here, so I can tell you about that. Anybody wants to come see that, if you have any time for questions.
Yes, we do. And thank you so much. Would anybody like to ask questions? I know we've run out of over time, but this has just been so fascinating.
Is it tomorrow yet?
I need to hear your question.
Yeah. You said before that it was the 16th or something like that. He didn't want to buy the blue diamond because it was female, and female diamonds were worth less. What makes a diamond male or female?
There's a long history in different traditions, many of them from the Middle East, which would allow different gems, primarily based on their color, to be thought of as male or female.
It's probably just like everything else. It's something that somehow attaches to a certain significance without any real.
It's like everything else, women get a bum rap.
And then there's that. Anybody else want to ask something? Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you tell the difference?
Can you tell the difference from your diamonds and the real diamonds?
Oh man, we should have just had questions. No. When I had the centenary diamond, that 100 million, 273 carat top color diamond, De Beers said that they wanted to help me get jobs with the Tower of London. And so they brought. Now we really have to go. The powers that be to their headquarters, and instead of bringing 2 diamonds, and mine, there was only 1 gem, and I was trying to keep these 2 military men engaged with what I could do for them, but we didn't have anything to compare, and that's the whole point of it. You can't tell which is it. And I worked on it for 14 months. I couldn't tell which one was either. So they did call down to the downstairs vault, the big De Beers vault, and they went down, and what they brought up was actually the $100 million diamond.
Must have been tempting.
It's always tempting.
Anybody else?
Sorry, are your diamonds insured like the real diamonds? I mean, because they're so perfect.
Are they what?
Insured. I mean, I'm assuming the real diamonds are insured for a lot of money. Are your diamonds insured as well? I mean, or I mean,
I hope so.
Okay.
Oh, that's a very important question. Because I'm always supposed to say that the actual diamonds never come to my studio. So don't come rob us. I always go to the actual diamond.
really stupid question, but talk about Knowledge Friday. I just never expected this, so thank you so much.
Shazam.
Thank you. What was your Hope Diamond made from? How did you replicate the Hope Diamond? What material?
That's not stupid at all, but I don't ever answer it because it's proprietary. But it is, as I mentioned before, it's a lab-grown gem that I have made to specification. It's the only proprietary question I have.
Oh, okay, I can ask another one.
That's why it's not stupid. You cornered me.
I'm ready to make a film with you. It's like crazy.
Can you answer the question that was never asked until the videotape was turned off? It was early on.
But is the video turned off?